No, let's start. Bueno, buenas noches. Gracias por venir. Bueno, algunos de ustedes ya son regulares, yo creo que la mayoría. ¿Hay alguien que nos vino por primera vez? Usted, ¿verdad? Sí, me parecía que...
Bienvenido.
Suyo. Bueno, bienvenido.
Welcome.
Como ve, somos un grupo que se ha estado reuniendo acá, ¿verdad? Para escuchar la lectura de cuentos de parte de Jacques Agot. Y don Jack nos ha estado acompañando también con música para iniciar. Es un formato muy bonito y nos alegra que haya podido venir. Hoy es, pues ya ¿estamos en qué? Esta ya es me perdí un poco el número, ¿verdad? Estamos... 6 semanas, ¿verdad? Esta ajá.
Sí, claro.
Entonces la sexta semana, sí, ya, qué dicha que ustedes llevan la cuenta. Y hoy, bueno, la sesión es en inglés realmente, pero para no ser tan impersonal, sentí que el saludo lo quería hacer en español, ¿verdad? Entonces, no sé, nada más bienvenidos. We are going to turn English in any moment anyway. And we had a change in the program. The Fall of the House of Usher is quite a long story, so after some deliberation, we decided to stay with Poe, but change the short story. So we'll be reading something different instead. We'll be reading The Masque of the Red Death, which is also very interesting. It has all the aesthetics from Poe that you like. Yeah?
Okay, we're not going to talk about the Fall of the House of Usher.
Not today, no, I'm afraid.
It was a last minute change.
But still Poe, still Edgar Allan Poe though.
We thought we could do it, but then I measured reading it, and it takes 50 minutes to read. It's actually one of his longest stories.
But
So,
still, we can talk about it.
well, but what we usually do is we read the text first, and then we comment it. The problem is reading The Fall of the House of Usher, which I adore. For me, it's probably my favorite story. But this is gonna eat at least 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes. So
We do the homework and read it at home.
Yes.
So what's the change?
we just replaced The Fall of the House of Usher by The Masque of the Red Death. It's the same Edgar Allan Poe. It's the same. Except they're equally good. They're equally good. In fact, many would probably prefer Masque of Red Death than Fall of the House of Usher. But Masque of Red Death is truly a fantastic story. It's a supernatural story. The Fall of the House of Usher is not supernatural. Comes close to be. Comes close, but it doesn't quite make it, you know.
Less known.
Pardon?
Menos conocida.
The Fall of the House of Usher?
No, this one.
The Masque of Red Death? Well, that tant mieux. That's for the best.
We wouldn't dare to change the author because we know that's sensitive, but we had to change that. Yeah, so we apologize for that. Anyway, let's welcome, although he has already spoken with you, but let's welcome Jacques Agot with a round of applause.
Muchas gracias. Muchas
As we
gracias.
normally do.
Muchas gracias.
Now the floor is
Muchas
yours.
gracias. Antes de empezar, quiero regalar unos libritos. Pero no sé si tenemos, creo que no vamos a tener todos.
Bueno, tal vez regalamos uno por pareja,
Sí,
entonces.
sí. Son míos, son de mi
Celos o
autoría.
pareja, perdón que les pregunte. Si les puedo regalar uno para los dos. Ustedes también.
Pero si hay divorcio, voy a mandar a pedir el mío.
Les debo decir, queridos amigos, que ese libro es... yo he publicado 21 libros. En mi opinión, y si es que algo vale, este es el mejor libro que yo he producido. Creo que es el mejor libro que he producido. Formalmente es el mejor logrado y es el libro donde hay más de mí, ¿verdad? Donde logré canalizar, plasmar más de mi ser interno. Sin embargo, les confieso que es el que peor se ha vendido, por no decir que nadie lo compra. Alguna gente cree que tal vez la portada es demasiado uninviting, que it's too dark, too somber, too depressing. It's not attractive visually, which I agree it is not.
Muchas gracias.
Pero les estoy dando un libro en el que yo creo ¿Ves? No les estoy dando algo que sea malo, les estoy dando lo que creo que es lo mejorcito que he producido al día de hoy. Son cuentos, sí, con el leitmotiv general de la muerte. Entonces, sí, claro que sí. Entonces se los estoy regalando, pero no se desanimen, sigan hasta el final, porque los mejores cuentos están hacia el final. Entonces, you have to kind of warm up through the book. So do persist in reading. It's kind of pathetic that writer has to say that. And it has to almost to beg people to read his stories, but that's the way it is in this country. So we are here to, once again, immerse ourselves in the, oh my God, so nightmarish world of Edgar Allan Poe. And this story is particularly nightmarish. It is a nightmare. It could be defined as an extremely well-described nightmare. You know, like a picture, like a photograph, or a series of photographs of a nightmare. And unlike The Fall of the House of Usher, it is fully supernatural. This is a supernatural kind of horror. Yes, indeed, The Fall of the House of Usher comes very close from being supernatural. You could say, well, yeah, the house is possessed by some kind of evil spirit. The whole house is like a death trap and has a will of its own. And if you take it that way, I would buy that hypothesis. I would not contradict it, you know. But I feel this is much more in the line of the supernatural. Yes?
We're not going to talk about it, but just taking advantage of you mentioning it. It's been traditionally translated as el hundimiento. But then the original title in English is the fall. Now, if you read the final paragraph where he escapes after Roderick dies, the house never sinks, does it?
The house sinks, yes. To use the writer's words, and the damn tarn closed sullenly and silently over the fragments of the house of Usher. That's the way it finishes. That's the last word. Again, and the damn tarn closely and sullenly closed over the fragments of the house of Usher. So yes, the house goes inside of the lake, which was a pestiferous, a deleterious, lake with all sort of, it was un pantano, era una marisma, una cosa terrible. And now, in movie versions, they usually will leave something, a little cross, a little piece of wall, a little something, So it looks like a ruin, half engulfed in the mist that eternally floated over the lake, So. But actually, in Poe's vision, we probably we can see whatever we want. But, I think he transmits us the idea that the whole damn thing goes to hell, goes under the water. It's death by immersion. And in many ways, one could argue, and that is a powerful line of thought, that the house of Usher is itself the very protagonist, the main character in a strange animistic way, because you have to be animistic, subscribe to the belief that things are inhabited by a soul. Everything is inhabited by a soul. So maybe the house is inhabited by a soul and every single piece of furniture inside of it, I don't know, So I mean, the point of view that the House of Usher is a supernatural story is definitely defendable. I do not subscribe, but it's definitely defendable and has its partisans, its voters. But we will stay with our beautiful Masque of the Red Death. As we all know, Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809, same year Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy was born, great German composer. I bet you don't know this. That's by Mendelssohn, see. When people get married, you usually play two. The first one people use is by Wagner.
Yeah.
Mi abuela cantaba, ya me casé, qué tonta fui. Tenía todo tipo de letras espantosas, porque es que le tocó un esposito, que pobrecita la viejita. The exit march para salir es la... the Mendelssohn. So, and all that just to tell you that Poe was born the same year that Mendelssohn, but Mendelssohn died in 1847. At least Poe made it until 40 years old. He died in 49. In 1849. Was born in Boston. And he died in Baltimore, and he was educated in the South, in the big plantations, the cotton plantations, with the African-American, mythology and legends and stories of ghosts and apparitions of all sorts. So he was very well prepared, He drew all those juices of fantastic literature from the mythology and the legends from the slaves in the South of the United States. He spent some time in Richmond, Virginia. He was sent to West Point, which he detested. He hated being in West Point. And isn't this crazy? I mean, you have a guy like Edgar Allan Poe, who was a hypersensitive, a dreamer, and you send it to become a military, a marine? I mean, I can barely think of anyone worse than Edgar Allan Poe as a marine. Thanks God he never... Well, yeah, there he has some competition. But Edgar Allan Poe lost his father. His father abandoned the family. His parents were actors, were nomadic actors. They were not talking Laurence Olivier and Meryl Streep. They little actors who went from town to town with their little car, their little, the costumes and a couple of escenografías, decor, But his father abandoned him, and then his mother died when he was 2 years old. All he was able to keep from his mother was a little medallion with a tiny oval portrait of her, which you can see in his short story called The Oval Portrait, which is a wonderful story, by the way. Kind of underrated, but wonderful story, and very, there I have to say, very supernatural, in that one. So we're going to read this wonderful story, Masque of the Red Death. So you have to put yourselves in the nightmare mood, okay? Everything in this story looks like some kind of horrible vision produced by we know Poe was addicted to opium, to laudanum and to opium. We know he was alcoholic. I mean, the man had quite a few demons to fight against, haunted by a tremendous fear of death. We all fear death. We all fear death, but we don't succumb to that. I have a friend who committed suicide. What he left in his note. I decided to commit suicide because I'm too scared of death. So I'm so scared of death that I have decided to end up this horrible thing, and I'm going to. And he committed suicide. I kind of understand him. I kind of understand him. So Edgar Allan Poe had that very intimate relationship with death. A father that just disappeared, a mother that died, not leaving any kind of memory or mental image in his son. Virginia Clem, which was his wife, died. He espoused her. He married Virginia Clem when she was 13 and he was 26. And she died with tuberculosis, a few years later, which left Poe completely devastated. So he had a sort of intimate, morbid rapport with death, which no question about it, death is one of the most recurrent topics in his literature, So we're going to read this. And we'll see what you think of it. The Masque of the Red Death. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had been ever so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains, sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleedings at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body and especially upon the face of the victim were the past ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. It was fulminio, ¿verdad? Una enfermedad que te mata en media hora. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castellated abbeys. Una abadía fortificada. Vean qué curioso. No está hablando de un castillo, es una abadía fortificada. Hay algo, there is something religious in this, Much of it is religious. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty wall girdled it in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massive hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair from without or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take care of itself. Important phrase. The external world could take care of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there were cards, there was beauty, and there was wine. All this and security were within. Without was the Red Death. So everything is here in an economy, interior, exterior. Inside and outside. It's very important to play with those two parameters. It was towards the close of the 5th or 6th month of this seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, that the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a masked ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade. But first, let me tell you of the rooms in which it was held. Now here goes the Poe, the clinical Poe, Let me tell you, just kind of like the telltale heart. Let me tell you how, typical of his style. But first, let me tell you of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, an imperial suite. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and each turn a novel effect. To the right and left in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor which pursued the windings of the suite. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That of the external extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the paints were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and litten with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Now, in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood opposite to each window a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that projected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illumined the room. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But hanging through the blood-tainted panes was ghastly the stream, and produced so wild a look upon the countenances of those who entered that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. So we have 7 chambers, united by they're connected by a meandering, by a wandering corridor, And you have tripods with flames in the corridors. And those tripods illuminated every one of the 7 chambers, through tainted glass. So the chambers had no source of light. The light was always exterior. The light was in the corridor. And the chambers were illuminated depending on the color of the tainted glass, either purple, red, black, or whatever. And there was that 7th chamber, the one with the black tapestries, where the tainted color was scarlet, was blood red, And the tapestries were kind of velvety black thing, like a Jesus Christ, like some kind of funeral place. So no one ventured in that chamber. It was kind of left alone. It was in this apartment also that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. Its pendulum swung to and fro from a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when its minute hand made the circuit of the face and the hour was to be stricken, there came from both the brazen lungs of the clock sound, which was clear and loud. Lapse of an hour, the musicians in the orchestra were constrained to pause momently in their performance to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And while the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if confused reverie of meditation, but when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremulousness and meditation as before. What a wonderful word, tremulousness, tremulousness. If there was that enormous ebony, black ebony clock placed in the chamber, illuminated by the red glasses and the dark velvety tapestries, that ebony, narrow but very tall. And every time, when the clock, indicated the hour, there was this sound, this horrible phantasmagoric sound of the clock, and people, it's like people are all in a dream, in a state of denial, completely intoxicated with wine, with ambrosia, with food, with God knows what kind of drugs, with sex, with voluptuousness. They don't want to face truth. They don't want to face reality. They're in a state of induced dream, of hypnosis. They don't want to know anything that what goes outside of the fortified abbey. They don't want to know anything about it. They have cut themselves from outside, from the world. But nevertheless, they have that clock, that huge Gothic clock. And every time the bell rang, they were like, they came down to earth. They were like, what am I doing here? I mean, Jesus Christ, what is it? So it was very important. The symbolism of that clock is tremendously important. That clock represents the principle of reality, what Sigmund Freud would have called the principle of reality, a call down to reality. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not mad. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great fete, and it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the costumes of the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has been since in Hernani. Hernani is a play by Victor Hugo. There were arabesque figures which unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as the madman fashions. There was much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers were stocked, in fact, a multitude of dreams. So all these people were like walking dreams. Incarnated dreams, personified dreams. In the mind of who? We don't know. And these, the dreams writhed in about, taking hue from the rooms and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their steps. And anon there strikes the ebony clock which stands in the hall of the velvet. And then, momently, all is still and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured just an instant, and a light, half-subdued laughter flows after them as they depart. Después de un susto terrible, a little bit of hilarity, a certain slight hilarity, a nervous hilarity, product of fear. And now again, the music swells, and the dreams live, and writhe to and more merrily than ever, taking cue from the many-tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly, of the 7, there are now none of the maskers who venture. For the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls. And to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock an ebony of muffled peal, more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears, who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirlingly on, turning, gyrating, until at length was sounded the 12th hour upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolution of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened perhaps that more of thought crept with more time into the meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled. And thus again it happened perhaps that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz, a murmur, expressive at first of disapprobation and surprise, then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited. But the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and out-Heroded Herod, outperformed Herod, done something worse than Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests, there are matters of which no jest can be properly made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse that the closest scrutiny must have had difficulty in detecting the cheat. And yet, all this might have been endured, if not approved by the mad revelers around. But the murmur had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. The mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. This vesture was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. When the eyes of Prince Prospero fell upon this spectral image, which with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers, he was seen to be convulsed. In the first moment with a strong shudder either or terror or disaster, but in the next, his brow reddened with rage. "Who dares," he demanded hoarsely of the group that stood around him, "who dares thus to make mockery of our vows? Uncase the varlet that we may know when we have to hang tomorrow at sunrise from the battlements. Will no one stir at my bidding? Stop him and strip him, I say, of those reddened vestures of sacrilege." It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero, and he uttered these words. They rang through the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of his group and the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there would found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that unimpeded he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if one impulse, shrank from the center of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet. Ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him, it was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rush hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of a deadly terror that has seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger, and had approached in rapid impetuosity to 2 or 3 feet the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly round and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which instantly afterwards fell prostrate in death the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in a terrible terror at finding the grey cerements and corpse-like mask which they handled so violently at rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of the revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall, and the life of the ebony clock went out without of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripod expired, and darkness and decay, and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. That's great. That's great writing. It's great writing, you know. It's symphonic writing. It's very musical writing. It's very symphonic. It's very grand. It's very majestic. It has a beautiful rhythm. Has beautiful sonorities too. You know, look at the end, for instance. Prince Prospero, in a way that can only be considered inhuman, you know, basically closes himself with a bunch of courtesans and musicians and jugglers and all sorts of things in his fortified abbey. Funny, I cannot quite. I'm avoiding it's my weakness. I cannot pinpoint why Poe wanted to give that tiny religious nuance to the Prince Prospero's castle. He could have said the palace or the castle. Indeed, he says it later on. But at first he says the fortified abbey. So then he infuses the place with a tiny religious flavor that's there somehow, isn't it? It's a bizarre choice, to say the least. A fortified abbey for a prince, for a dissolute prince, il dissoluto punito, you know, Don Giovanni. He's kind of a Don Giovanni type, you know, il dissoluto punito, you know, he's a decadent, awful prince. Prospero, that's interesting. Prospero, where could have Edgar Allan Poe taken the name Prospero? It's a very important piece of literature.
The French writer.
Prosper Mérimée. No, because Prosper Mérimée was a little after Poe. No, in Shakespeare, The Tempest, there is Prospero. He is the magician. The Tempest by Shakespeare is a difficult play. It's a difficult, relatively little known, very esoteric, very ciphered, but very beautiful play. Very beautiful. It won't subjugate you at once, you know, in a first reading, but little by little it will conquer you. Because that's what happened with me. So there is a magician in Shakespeare The Tempest called Prospero. No doubt, Poe took it from there. Do remember that Poe in his infancy spent 5 years in England. You know, un lustro, 5 years in England when he was a child. You know, and you know that had its impact on his life and on his style. So a prince named Prospero, like the magician of Shakespeare. Okay, so he barricades himself inside of the fortified abbey. Barricades, you know, with all the doors are closed, all that's luxuriant, all that's voluptuous, all that is carnal, all that's sensuous is inside. All the abundance, everything that is delicious is inside of the walls of the fortified abbey. But you don't want to be outside. Outside it is the people, the whole nation dying, at the feet of the big doors of the palace. So he's a son of a bitch. I mean, to start with, to be a prince, a man of power, in a position of power, least we can say is that he's not taking care at all of his súbditos. None whatsoever. So his action is of tremendous egoism. Is very centripetal, very centripetal. Everything towards him, And yes, he can be considered an artist insofar as he created the whole decoration, the whole notion of the interior of the palace. So Poe makes this point important. In most palaces, in Versailles, Palace of Versailles, you open one door, then you have a bunch of doors open in line so you can see 100 yards, because all the doors are aligned. This is not the case. This is a very convoluted, meandering structure. So you have, again, a corridor. That's meandering. It's like a serpent, And in those corridors, you have tripods always. Is fire. And the chambers, which are 7 big chambers, are illuminated depending on the color of their stained glass. Es vitralismo. Es cristalería. Es como los vitrales góticos. With the problem that there is a dark chamber. That's on top of that is velvety. One cannot help thinking of the interior of a sarcophagus, esa textura terciopelada de los ataúdes. ¿Puedo contarles una anecdotilla? La voy a contar en español, si me permitís, Lili. La anécdota, es apenas una coñita, cosa tal vez lo más espeluznante que me ha pasado en mi vida. Llegué yo a la funeraria Jardines, ¿cómo se llama? El Recuerdo, la que queda por Don Bosco, Jardines del Recuerdo. Llegué yo, iba a la vela de un amigo, y me ve uno de los funcionarios, uno de los empleados, y me toma por el brazo. Don Jack, don Jack, tengo que enseñarle una cosa. Venga, vamos al segundo piso, Mire este ataúd. Mire qué belleza de ataúd. Este ataúd es para gente como usted. Este ataúd es para gente importante. Como toque. No quiero tocar, no, toque. Vea la textura. Mira, es puro terciopelo. No, pero vea qué suavecito. Debe ser delicioso estar ahí metido. No, toque. Mire, ya, toque. Y mira, la puerta se cierra aquí queda la ventanilla. Esto se cierra aquí con unas aldabas. Nadie lo puede molestar. Este ataúd fue hecho para usted, don Jack. Es para usted. Y yo se lo ofrezco además en pagos y le voy a hacer una reducción por ser usted un cliente frecuente. No. Pero imagínese usted ahí adentro. Imagínese qué cómodo, ¿verdad? No, así de macabro. Yo me dije, este maldito estúpido es el peor vendedor de la vida. Lili, ¿puede haber algo peor que vender ataúdes? ¿Cómo puede uno vender ataúdes? Pero eso me pasó. No, perdón, señor, sí, yo sé que no, es que gente importante, como, sí, no, yo no soy tan importante, no, déjeselo, cuando se muera Keylor Navas lo metí ahí, a mí no, yo me voy, y me fui a la otra capilla que estaba yo, pero mientras viva no olvidaré eso, de decir, toque, ya que el terciopelo. Now that there is the seventh chamber, all velvety and black, and with color-tainted glass, and the light of the tripods pierced through that glass. So the interior was black with somehow reddish nuances, And so the clock is very important. The clock is a reminder, It's like, in old abbeys and conventual places, the monks, many monks of different denominations and disciplines had this habit. Whenever they walk past each other, Bueno, entre los claustros se cruzaban, tenían que decirse uno al otro, morir habemos, frater. Sí, morir habemos. Hemos de morir, hermano. Sí, hemos de morir. Se lo recordaban 40 veces al día. Cualquiera que se topaban, morir habemos. Sí, morir habemos, frater. Sí. Para recordarse cada 10 minutos que tenían que morir. Well, it's terrible. It's a terrible way to live. Horrible. But so the clock is a reminder. It's a morir habemos, frater. It's a reminder. See, I know you guys are having great fun. You're eating like pigs. You're fornicating like rabbits. You are listening to luscious music, and you're just in a kind of an orgy, just to dupe yourselves, to close the eyes to the fact that the whole country is being devastated by a tremendous pestilence that killed people in a matter of half an hour. The pores, you were bleeding from your pores. It was a horrendous thing. And so the clock is a reminder. You guys think you're being very, you guys are having a great fun? Well, I have news for you. That fun is going to pass. That fun is very limited. That fun tiene sus días contados. Ustedes, montón de escapistas, because it's a problem. It's a problem. There's a whole population of people here who don't want to face reality. There is that point, okay? They're escapistas. Escapistas activos y pasivos. Sí, además. That's a very good point. There is a little sacrilegious thing, isn't it? A little heretic thing in sustaining such a tremendous bacchanal, in a sacred place. I mean, already that gesture is sacrilegious, is blasphemous, it's problematic. Thank you. I had never observed that fact. Thank you very much. You see, that's the beautiful thing about reading things together. Yes?
The abbey was not built for religious purposes. It was like a private place with an interior, with a very curious interior design with 7 chambers and everything. It was not meant to be a sacred place.
Probably it was an abbey.
Originalmente sí. Originally, yes. I mean, basically, an abbey is a place donde vive un abad. Donde viven abades o vive un abad. Es verdad, es una abadía, es una forma un poquito superior de monasterio, ¿verdad? Un monasterio, digamos, de mayor jerarquía, donde hay personajes eclesiásticos un poquito por encima del monjecito descalzo, cartujo, ¿verdad? Con su cintita aquí. Esta es una abadía. No, the interior absolutely has nothing to do with an abbey.
I was thinking about that.
Yeah.
Why Abbey has 7 chambers and...
Well, because the Prince Prosper decided to overhaul the whole thing, bring a whole different structure. He was a kind of an interior decorator himself, so he totally took away the ascetic, the religious, the mystic quality of the place and turn it into a place of sin and of dissolution and of debauch, So, yes, already there he is, so to say, soiling, something that's sacred. So, there are many reasons why Prince Prosper should be punished. Edgar Allan Poe presents him not as a model. We don't want to be like Prince Prosper. He's the absolute negation of solidarity, absolute negation of empathy, absolute negation of misericordia, of compassion. Zero. It's him with his revelers and his people closed in the security and the safety of that bubble, of that hermetic bubble that is the fortified abbey. Oh, but the Red Death outsmarted him. Now remember, it was a bal masque. It was a masquerade. Everybody was wearing some kind of mask or disguise. Very important, So the Red Death enters into the place naturally and easily, for he had no, the Red Death had no tangible form, was like a ghost, simply a presence that assumed the features of a corpse or of a recently diseased person from the Red Death. So estaba haciendo un sudario con una cara horrorosa y todo marcado con las manchas rojas de la muerte roja. Pero el horror en el punto climático del cuento es cuando el príncipe Próspero, cae fulminado, persigue a la muerte roja hasta la cámara negra, saca su daga, cae fulminado, ¿verdad? No sabemos cómo. Y cuando un puñado de valientes, ¿verdad?, asustados se metieron y le arrancaron el disfraz a la muerte roja, vieron que no había nada debajo. There was no tangible form. There was no body to give. Pope, he puts it very, very well. Yes. The disguise of the Red Death was untenanted by any tangible form. Untenant. What's a tenant? A tenant. Un inquilino. The Tenant. There's a very wonderful movie by Roman Polanski called The Tenant. And have you seen it? It's great. It's very puzzling. It's very, very intriguing. But that's good Polanski. Definitely good. So there is no tenant. There is nobody's occupying that disguise. There is nothing between the disguise. Underneath the disguise, there is nothing. There's emptiness. What walked inside of the fortified alley was sort of a ghost of a non-tangible, non-visible presence. It made itself visible by using the shroud. La mortaja made itself visible, but actually there was nothing. It was disguised, untenanted, not occupied by anybody. So we have a problem here. There's an interesting social reading here, the social reading here. We have a privileged class, no question about it. The Prince Prospero, filthy rich, completely unconcerned about his súbditos, which is unforgivable. Lavish kind of style, decadent, very decadent kind of style, who manages to construct this bizarre structure inside of the palace. Can you imagine? That's very important. You could not see in this kind of morphology, in this kind of distribution of the space. This tale has all to do with space, very important, and with time, because of the clock. In that space, in that convoluted, labyrinthine disposition of the space, you could not see anything but the next chamber, because then the corridor would turn right or left and go. So it is a bit like an intestine, sort of. I remember. It sounds nasty, but there is a scholar of the Edgar Allan Poe called Marie Bonaparte, which was a grand niece of Napoleon Bonaparte, and she had studied with Freud, and she made an interesting analysis of several of Edgar Allan Poe stories, several. And it's a good analysis, Marie Bonaparte. And he says that the whole thing sort of was reminiscent of an intestine, the way it turned and turned and turned and turned and turned and turned, And then he goes into other hypotheses that are a bit too twisted. I don't want to share them with you. A bit too twisted, So.
Excuse me, can this be considered like a punishment to Prosper and all his friends?
There is. I think there is, no question. There is a bit of the il dissoluto punito. Don Giovanni in Mozart's opera, il dissoluto, una persona dissoluta, ¿verdad? Il dissoluto. There is a bit of that. That I'm not saying necessarily that is, and I'm not saying necessarily Poe wanted to punish. I'm not saying Poe acted like a moralist, for he was no moralist at all. Himself was pretty messy himself, to preach to anybody. But yes, it is definitely correct to perceive in all this a tremendous transcendental punition, a châtiment, castigo, He's punished. It's a tremendous punishment. It's a case of crime and punishment. Crime of what? Of indifference to the pain of people. Remember that Martí, José Martí, a great Cuban poet, says que Dios me libre nunca de serme indiferente ante el dolor de la gente. Siempre me acuerdo de ese bello verso. Que Dios me libre nunca serme indiferente ante el dolor de la gente. Mercedes Sosa lo usa también. Sí, lo sé. Pero Mercedes Sosa lo toma de Martí. Por cierto, sin darle crédito, pero no importa. Me gusta mucho Mercedes Sosa, me gusta mucho. Pero sí, es una importante frase, muy importante. Y yo creo que es tal vez lo peor que nos puede pasar como seres humanos es que nos desensibilicemos ante el dolor del prójimo. That just cannot be. That's the end of all sociability. That's the end of civilization. That's the end of the project of living together, That's against every single conceivable religion.
But yet, Paul, being no moralist, as you're saying, he could be pointing at any of us in the sense that if we were given the choice of being outside, exposed to the Red Death, or being inside, enjoying the pleasures and the food and the music, what do we choose?
Yeah.
He could be pointing at any of us. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
If you were given the choice, okay, you practice your solidarity, stay outside and die. Or I give you the choice of enjoying the pleasures and being inside.
By doing that, which you very sharply point out, by doing that, Poe kind of sits us all in the guilty sit. He kind of organizes an enormous trial, an enormous judgment over every single one of us. Look, I have to take a cab later on to go to my home. How many homeless people I'm going to see in the traject, before I reach my fortified abbey, which I assure you has nothing to do with Prince Prosperous. How many people I'm going to see in the street, drunk people, homeless people, migrants, yes. I mean, I'm not going to be much better than Prince Prospero, I assure you, So, yes, the story is a very interesting thing because it provokes a self-questioning. It provokes un examen de nosotros mismos. Sí, compañero.
I was going to say that the whole relation with time is very clear throughout the story. Not only the fact that it's a winding corridor and 7 is not a fortunate number, it's specifically 7. I think there is a relation with religion here that he does point to several times. I think it's more of a critique of the religious institution as hiding within their within their fortress. But 7, I also think of the 7 days it took God to create the world, so there is that kind of connection there as well. And it's illuminated only from within, and no one else is able to be a guest of the party unless they kind of accept that enlightenment to a certain extent. And I think the Red Death kind of embodies, although it's not a body at all, kind of the collective power of everyone else saying, let's overthrow this religious.
Yes. Thank you. That's very, very nicely put. taking account that I don't think there is any other story where the form, where the morphology of the place is as important as here. Take notice that take note of the fact that the source of light was always vitrals, tainted glass. Eso es una catedral gótica. Eso es un elemento de arquitectura religiosa. Lo propio de los vitrales, un rosetón o lo que vos querás, son los vitrales de Notre Dame, Chartres, Estrasburgo, Reims, Amiens, Rouen, las grandes catedrales góticas, ¿verdad? Entonces, los vitrales están prostituidos. Ahí tenés un símbolo religioso, el vitral. No es normal que la gente viva con vitrales en las casas, ¿verdad? Está prostituido. Porque realmente lo que el príncipe próspero hace ahí es un perfecto prostíbulo. Lo que es un desmadre lo que hace ahí, ¿verdad? Entonces, well, he probably deserves to be punished for more reasons than one, for many reasons, you know. Now the clock, you know, the clock sounded, and everybody, you know, and people were like that. And they just, their hands on their brows, you know, quitándose el sudor. What's going on? What's going on? It's like they wake up from the state of altered consciousness. They're in an altered state of consciousness through music, drugs, colors, tripods, tainted glass, everything you want, food, you know, liquor, you know, and the bell of the clock, you know, sounds, and all of a sudden they're, but what am I doing here? But then, quick enough, well, let's keep just having fun, you know. A nervous little laugher, a nervous like, why was I so overcome by this sudden fear? I mean, this is stupid. I mean, life is to be enjoyed. Oh, come on, let's forget that and let's keep playing. I'm going to keep dancing all night until the next hour again rang the bell. So, I mean, the symbol of the clock is very important. The clock represents death. No matter how much you want to drug yourself, death is going to come and seize you. ¿Alguno de ustedes vio una película francesa, Marco Ferretti, 1971, que se llamaba La Grande Bouffe, la gran comilona? Bueno, esas películas, si la pueden ver, hay que verla. Son 4 hombres solos y que actorazos: Marcello Mastroianni, Philippe Noiret, Michel Piccoli y Ugo Tognazzi, el de La Jaula de las Locas. Esos 4. La Grande Bouffe, la gran comilona. Pero la del 71. Marco Ferretti. La Grande Bouffe, está en francés. Son 4 hombres ya viejones, en los 50, 60, que deciden encerrarse un fin de semana entero en una casa de campo y morirse, pero morirse de hartazón. Entonces uno se muere comiendo como un puerco y ya no le cabe y vomita y sigue comiendo y comiendo hasta que le da una apoplejía, un derrame cerebral y queda muerto así con la boca llena de pastel. Otro muere defecando sobre literalmente una pirámide de heces. Otro muere congelado, prácticamente haciéndole el amor a su carro de carreras porque tenía ese fetichismo de los carros, ¿verdad? Y el otro muere cuando ya harto de comer le traen un último pastel que tenía como 2 tortas con forma de senos. Y donde ve aquellas tortas gelatinosas con forma de senos, simplemente se va de cabeza y se ahoga en las. Es una película que puede generar mucha risa, pero en el fondo está habitada by a very profound anguish. No, it's not funny. No. The movie is it's irrigated by a tremendous stream of anguish. La angustia de morir, ¿verdad? Ellos vienen, esto es un suicidio colectivo. Vienen a morirse, pero ¿a morir de qué? A morir de placer. Eligieron reventar de comer, reventar de fornicar, reventar de defecar, reventar de estarle manoseando el carro de carreras. In any case, die. It's a suicide. Suicide by excess. Suicide by pleasure, you know? But they knew what they wanted. I mean, it's a movie, it's not for all stomachs. It's not for all tastes. It may be a bit repulsive. I happen to love it. I love that movie because of, because of the tremendous unquietness, the tremendous anguish that flows underneath the surface of the movie. That's what makes it profoundly tragic, I think. Sí, querido amigo. Dale.
Es que encuentro un cierto paralelismo con la historia en Rusia en la Primera Guerra Mundial, que los zares mandan, Nicolás era el rey, mandan al ejército a pelear, pero el ejército está muerto de hambre.
Claro.
No tiene municiones, no tiene nada, no les importa. Mientras tanto, ellos están dando los grandes banquetes y botando comida que les sobra, contenedores, y el pueblo muerto de hambre, peleando.
Atroz. Atroz por una causa que no es de ellos, una causa que no les interesa, que no los interpela, en la que no están comprometidos, no están engagés. There is no engagement from here. Stupid. Well, the Vietnam War. I mean, there's so many wars have been absurd and unnecessary right now.
Le manda a decir al primo, al Kaiser en Alemania, por dónde va a ir el ejército.
Sí.
Porque era primo de él.
Sí. Sí, es terrible. Bueno, esa porquería le costó ser fusilado, ¿verdad? Nikolai Romanov y Alexandra, con toda su familia, incluido Alexei, el hijo, que conozco la historia muy bien porque el hijo era hemofílico. Sí, Alexei era hemofílico. De hecho, acuérdense que Rasputín tenía luz verde para entrar a toda hora a palacio y hacer lo que le diera la gana, porque tenía poder hipnótico para sedar al hijo. No había lisalgil, amigos. No había lisalgil, no había aspirina. Aspirina no podía, un hemofílico no puede tomar aspirina porque eso arrala la sangre, entonces más bien estimula los sangrados. Yo soy hemofílico, como se los he dicho. Entonces conozco esa historia bien. El monje loco Rasputín, que la zarina le puso la corte porque tenía el poder de aliviar a su chiquito. En aquella época que no había pero ni un cochino té de tilo. No había una mejoral, no había nada. It was a horrible thing. To be a hemophiliac in those years was the worst thing. You know, nobody, you probably would not even reach adolescence. You would die before that.
Regardless of social class.
Regardless, because he was in the highest peak of the hierarchy. Imagine the son of the Tsar and the Tsarina. Still could not manage his pains, his bleeding episodes, his hemorrhages. Terrible. See, Lily?
That's the illusion of control in the story.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly the whole, you can't avoid death. And it doesn't matter if there's a religious connotation, right? In the sense that I am going to close myself up and I'm going to masquerade and I'm going to try to avoid the inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
You can't escape death. And that's really the part of the story that is so strong in the sense that it doesn't matter your position or your class or whatever, you still cannot avoid it.
Yes, it's a wonderful commentary, Lily. Yes, you're fatally vulnerable.
And that's the clock reminding.
Yes. So the clock is a reminder of many things, you know? I hope you won't become freaked out and start, checking your clocks. Charles Baudelaire, great French writer, the author of Les Fleurs du Mal, The Flowers of Evil. By the way, he was a tremendous fan of Edgar Allan Poe. Tremendous fan. He translated a lot of Edgar Allan Poe. Edgar Allan Poe, Baudelaire tenía un edificio, tenía un reloj de pared grande Y sí, después de leer esto, ya lo molestaba tener el reloj, ¿verdad? Entonces le mandó a quitar el cuadrante, los números, el péndulo, todo. Dejó las agujitas inmovilizadas y el reloj lo que decía, es más tarde de lo que crees. Entonces cada vez que quería, ¿qué hora es? Es más tarde de lo que creo. A ver, es más tarde de lo que creo. Which is right. Lo terrible es que en efecto es más tarde de lo que creemos. He vivido eso con indecible angustia. Ese libro es producto de esa angustia, de que no voy a tener vida ni tiempo para hacer las montones de cosas que quiero hacer. No hacer, producir libros que tengo que escribir. Todos están ahí, todos pegados en un embudo. 15 libros que no tengo plata para sacar. Con mucha suerte saldrán póstumos, ¿verdad? It's very sad, but I have suffered that anguish. I am a victim of that ebony clock myself. But you're absolutely right. It's the Prince of Prospero has nothing but an illusion of control. He's not really in control. Nobody can be in control against death, you know. All he has done is truly a masquerade. A masquerade at the first level, yes, people have masks, but also at a spiritual level. It's a spiritual and a moral masquerade. He's masquerading against death. Death is gonna seize him sooner or later, you know. So this altered state of consciousness allows them to live the illusion of immortality, of invulnerability, of eternity. We are eternals. Where there's no worries here, you know. All that misery, that's outside the doors of the palace. Inside, everything is joy and safety. And you know, well, no, it wasn't. It wasn't. He learned it in the worst possible way. Sí, amiguita.
Of Dorian Gray. Va por ahí.
Dorian Gray, well, Dorian Gray kind of had his own fortified abbey, you know, created his own space of quote-unquote invulnerability, which failed, also in his case, you know. It's very interesting. I mean, what do you think of this story? Well, no, what do you think? How did you feel? The feelings are more important than the thoughts at this point.
There's an anguish of something that's coming.
Of impending doom.
You know something's coming.
Yeah. Yeah, impending doom. Something is approaching and you cannot stop it. You know?
Here, but I have a thought. Yeah. Also, like language, because by now we've read a few things by Edgar Allan Poe and we've read life in here, and then the language in this one is so much thunderous, maybe than in other ones. It's like almost as if you want to, I don't know, it's like the words create, or like the words kind of like start building on top of you. And
Absolutely.
Like
Absolutely, Zach. Very, very smartly pointed out. The style here, the lexicon, the vocabulary is far more Gothic than in The Telltale Heart or The Cask of Amontillado. There is nothing particularly Gothic about those stories, but here he's using a démodé kind of language. He's using plenty of anachronisms, you know, and also literary figures that are also anachronic. For instance, the last paragraph, the lapidating last paragraph, he uses something called polysyndeton. Syndeton significa nudo, nudo en griego. Polysyndeton significa muchos nudos. Cuando yo hago una construcción del tipo I, estoy usando muchos nudos, polysyndeton, ¿verdad? Podría haberlos eliminado, podría haber usado comas y no poner esa partícula conectiva, ese tejido conectivo que es el I, ¿verdad? Pero al poner los is, le da a la prosa más fluidez que las comas hubieran parado la lectura cada rato. Le da más fluidez, más dirección, más inexorabilidad y y hasta un carácter como de letanía, de cosas que se repite. Atención a la cantidad de is que usa. And, ¿verdad? And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night. And one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of the revel, and died each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ivory clock went out with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripod expired, and darkness and decay and the Red Death had illimitable dominion over all. Now, what feeling does es desesperante, es acumulativo, las comas no te hubieran dado ese efecto, pero es acumulativo. A ver, yo tengo este librito, corazón, hijo de Dios. Muchas gracias, Manuelito, muchas gracias. Gracias. Eso lo podemos ver. Por cierto, que a Poe le gustaban los polysyndeton's. El final de la casa Usher, que la vamos a ver en algún momento, no crean que la vamos a dejar tirada. Ojo, la final de la casa Usher, en español. Mientras la contemplaba, la fisura del edificio se ensanchó rápidamente. Pasó un furioso soplo del torbellino. Todo el disco de la satélite interrumpió de pronto ante mis ojos, y mi espíritu vaciló al ver desmoronarse los poderosos muros. Y hubo un largo y tumultuoso clamor como la voz de mil torrentes. Y a mis pies el profundo y corrompido estanque se cerró sombrío, silencioso sobre los restos de la casa Usher. De nuevo es ese efecto de catarata. Pero tal vez aquí es hasta peor, porque and darkness and decay and the Red Death held illimited dominion over all. Y atención que los pone en mayúscula. Darkness le pone mayúscula. Darkness, como si fuera una alegoría, como si fuera un ser humano. And decay es descomposición, es podredumbre, ¿verdad? Darkness con mayúscula, decay con mayúscula y Red Death con decay. Todavía tal vez Red Death, que es prácticamente un personaje, pero no tenías por qué ponerle mayúscula darkness y a decay. Sin embargo lo hace, y eso, el efecto es bueno, porque al ponerle mayúsculas personalizás, humanizás, es como una prosopopeya. Hacer de la oscuridad, darkness, la convertís como en una entidad autónoma. Sí, compañero.
No, yo voy a mencionar que en algún momento también hace lo mismo con time. Pone time en mayúscula en un momento. Cierto, es muy de él. Es muy de él. En su poesía también. Death siempre la pone con mayúscula. Time, destiny, will, life, las pone siempre con... Sí, amigo.
No, es que lo que estoy viendo es la mayúscula, pero por efecto de la puntuación. Ahora, si quería crear ese efecto acumulativo, ¿por qué le pone punto? And the light of the gay, punto. And the flames of the tripods expired, punto. Pudo haber logrado el efecto sin necesidad de esa puntuación.
Para mí se hubiera hecho, veamos el párrafo en su totalidad, se hubiera hecho muy largas las frases muy largas. Ya también hay un problema cuando no hay pausas, porque entonces empieza a sonar como escritura automática, es escritura surrealista, fluir de la conciencia. Necesitas las pausas, también esas son importantes, pero todo ese último párrafo es una obra maestra. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. Pausa. He had come like a thief in the night. Una metáfora, no metáfora, atención, es un símil. Un símil no es lo mismo que una metáfora, ¿verdad? Metáfora es cuando yo digo tus labios son como fresas silvestres. El como es un símil. Si quitas la partícula cognitiva como y decís tus labios son fresas silvestres, eso es una metáfora. Entonces, atención, no es lo mismo una metáfora que un símil. Sí, compañero.
La figura literaria, ¿cómo se llama?
Polysyndeton.
Que es diferente a literación.
Es muy diferente, sí. Polysyndeton, el contrario de polysyndeton es un asyndeton, donde no tenés nudos conectivos. No hay nudos. Como nos decís, apático, apolítico, etcétera. El A es negación, ¿verdad?
Como hay repetición de sonidos, entonces me pareció que parecía aliteración, que es repetición de sonido.
También. Aquí el Poe prosista se contamina del Poe poeta, ¿verdad? And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night. Símil, no metáfora. And one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of the revel. Revelers y después revel, crea como una rima interna. And died each in the despairing posture of his fall. Ahí ya hacía falta un punto, ¿verdad? And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay. Lo leí mal porque este es went out. Tiene que sonar como que se apaga, como quien sopla una candela, se apaga. And the life of the ebony clock went out with that of the last of the gay. Went out. Se apagó, se murió, ¿verdad? And the flames of the tripods expired. Es muy interesante porque no dice se apagan. Expirar es lo que una persona expiró. A las 10:30 de la noche expiró, murió. ¿Verdad? Los trípodes se ven un poco personificados o humanizados cuando se usa expired. Pudo haber usado otro adjetivo, sí. And darkness, and decay, and the red death. Es muy importante este polysyndeton. Recuerden la palabra. This important. Polysyndeton. Aparece mucho en Edgar Allan Poe, ¿verdad? Porque le da un ritmo, le da una fluencia. Sentimos que la prosa fluye, se te viene como no como un maremoto, pero como un tsunami, sí. Es como una cosa que sube y te va arrastrando, ¿verdad? And darkness and decay. Atención a la sinfonía de des, el uso de la D. And the darkness and decay and the red death held illimitable dominion over all. Tampoco es ninguna casualidad que esté usando todas esas des. Él lo hacía mucho, ¿verdad? Saturar una frase o un periodo o un verso con una sonoridad. En el poema de las campanas, the bells, 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 bells. He reiterates the word bells, bells, bells in such a manner that you feel like you're already listening to the actual bells, you know?
¿Se podría decir que es aliteración? La
Sí, sin duda. Sí, claro que sí. Sí. Sin duda, claro que sí. Sí. Y esos and, ¿verdad? English has some beautiful things that just cannot be translated. And the ebony clock, the word clock, is something... Es un sonido como sin pedal, sin resonancia. Si fuera con pedal sería... Eso es en francés, horloge. Horloge es una sonoridad. Horloge. Pero clock es categórico, seco, fatídico. Es un balazo. The clock kills you. The clock kills you. The clock. ¿Verdad? So Poe was a wonderful manipulator of sonorities in the English language. And Isaac is absolutely right. In this story, he's using a vocabulary that's intentionally passé. Even by Edgar Allan Poe's time and standards, this is a vocabulary that could have been written 100 years before him. No, he's been Gothic. His use of vocabulary is Gothic. There was a sharp cry. Es un sonido agudo. Sharp cry. ¿Verdad? En español no. Hubo un sonido agudo. Hubo un grito agudo. No te da lo mismo. Tal vez en francés sí. Un cri aigu. Ustedes saben que el gran problema de los traductores al francés de Poe, que los tuvo eminentes, porque Baudelaire, Mallarmé, Verlaine, todos intentaron traducir El Cuervo al francés y toparon con el mismo obstáculo y no hay forma de subsanarlo, que es que en francés no hay un adverbio con la sonoridad de nevermore. nevermore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. It's only that and nothing more, evermore. Un sonido cavernous, un sonido cavernoso. Es horrible, me da hasta vergüenza decirlo. Lo que el francés tenía para eso era jamais plus, jamais plus. Jamais plus, nunca jamás plus. ¿Cómo? Es imposible, pero es que no hay forma de nevermore. Por el contrario, Pérez Bonalde, gran escritor venezolano, hizo una traducción del Cuervo al español que es casi tan buena como el original, o tan buena. Y esa es la que no pierdan su tiempo en otra. Cuando quieran oír el Cuervo y un día vamos a poner el Cuervo ahí leído no por mí, por Basil Rathbone.
¿No sabe uno cuál es la traducción en español a la que tiene acceso?
Nunca jamás. Es Pérez Bonalde, es lo que nunca jamás. Y el nunca más cambia, porque es un ritornelo que aparece muchas veces. Nunca más, nunca jamás. Entonces va cambiándola. Pero claro, nunca jamás no tiene el sonido de nevermore. Es menos oscuro, pero nunca jamás, ¿verdad? Recuerden que Poe, una vez más, usaba las sonoridades para evocar lo que estaba diciendo. And the dank tarn closed sullenly and silently over the fragments of the house of Usher. ¿Qué oyen ustedes de todo esto? Disóciense del contenido aquí. Conviertan el sonido, el vocabulario en mera música. Estoy aquí tocando piano. And the dank tarn closed sullenly and silently over the fragments of the house of Usher. ¿Qué es lo que se oye? ¿Ah? No es viento, no. Es como la forma en que el estanque silenciosa, sibilinamente, silently, solemnly se va cerrando sobre la casa. Y no hay barullo. Ya, la casa se hundió. Ahora lo que está es hundiéndose en silencio. Como una persona que va muriendo en silencio, se va apagando. Sí, podría usarse para dibujar el viento. Verlaine, les sanglots longs des violons de l'automne blessent mon cœur d'une longueur monotone. Ahí hay una sonoridad, ¿verdad? Que satura todo. Les sanglots longs des violons de l'automne blessent mon cœur d'une longueur monotone. Todo es Los sollozos lánguidos de los violines del otoño hieren mi corazón con una languidez monótona. Eso es lo que dice. Pero Verlaine, a lo Edgar Allan Poe, a quien admiraba tremendamente, por supuesto, crea la sensación de como un lamento, ¿verdad? Sí, es maravilloso el efecto, es maravilloso. Yo les había leído una linecita de un poema de...
And what melody would you associate with the story we just read?
Oh my God, it would have to be something terrible.
You can play it.
Yes, that's for sure. I understand. Queridos amigos, tengo recital el jueves. El jueves. Aquí en el Teatro Junio, we are all invited. $5,000, you know. It's no big deal. And sí. But they're all invited. No, they are forced. It's mandatory. It's mandatory. Oh, there is Chopin, Debussy, Liszt, Bartók, and Manuel de Falla. Maybe somebody else. That's basically it. No, it's going to be fun because I'm going to play the pieces, and I'm going to say just a few words about every piece. So you will be welcome. I mean, I hope you're there. I need people. Jueves a las 7 en el Eugene O'Neill. Sí, ahí está todo. A ver, Lily. Maybe this can sort of give the... el preludio número 7 de Chopin. Y sí, ese es un preludio. Sí. There's quite a bit of death en él.
Algunos impromptu de Schubert tienen como algo...
Ah, sí. Los cuadros de una exposición son fenomenales. Ahí hay algunos que son bastante mórbidos, ¿verdad? Sí. Wagner, sí. Berlioz. No, hay mucha música poiana. Mucha música. Ustedes saben que Claude Debussy, of all people, Claude Debussy hizo una ópera sobre The Fall of the House of Usher. No me hallo, no encuentro cómo, no puedo ver a Madeline Usher cantando como una soprano de coloratura y a Roger Usher, que es un enfermo hipocondríaco que se está muriendo y está loco y es necrofílico, cantando con un tenor así como Pavarotti. No, it just doesn't work for me. I just can't take it. De todas formas no la terminó y no se oye nunca, pero mejor para Debussy, porque no se puede hacer una ópera sobre algo tan morboso como The Fall of the House of Usher. Can you imagine? You know, it's kind of... Now this could be perhaps this I could see more like it.
Casi no tiene personajes, como para hacer una ópera.
Sí.
No tiene personajes, pues Madeline Usher nunca cantaría.
No.
Solo pasa
Un par de veces. Y Roderick Usher y el amigo, básicamente.
Que nunca se dice su nombre.
No se dice el nombre, no. Muy interesante. Qué cuentazo es ese, pucha.
Por interrumpir. Yo sé que siempre queremos seguir conversando, entonces por eso los invito a que vengan la próxima semana. A la misma hora vamos a estar aquí. La próxima semana la sesión es en español y vamos a estar discutiendo Ropa de Muertos de Ali.
Con el autor aquí.
Entonces eso le da un valor
Hay
agregado.
algo constante en sus cuentos, en la elección de los cuentos, y es la muerte.
No me he dado cuenta, pero si usted me lo dice, pues tal parece, ¿verdad?
Sigamos con Lovecraft.
Sí, amigas, sí. Pues sí, seguramente. No, lo importante es que el cuento sea una buena obra maestra, ¿verdad? Que este lo es. Amigos, ¿cómo expresarles lo mucho que los quiero y lo agradecido que me siento de que estén aquí? Sobre todo los reincidentes, los recidivants, ¿verdad?
Pues de parte de la biblioteca Mark Twain les agradecemos mucho la participación. Vamos a mantener la biblioteca un ratito más, si quieren acercarse, porque tienen que ir, porque no hay nada.
Pero de veras, muchas gracias. No tengo lapicerito.
Yo lo veo el juez y Dios quiere.
No, si no llega usted